Hi, my name is Dolly. This is my story about how my teacher chased me, and because of this, I almost went crazy. A new physics teacher, Mrs. Greta, came to our school this year. She was a young woman who had just graduated from teaching college. Everyone was happy. We were glad the teacher would be a person with whom we would have a rather small age gap. She understands teenagers' feelings and knows how to communicate with us on equal terms. And she was in love with physics, so it was very interesting to listen to the new topics. Of course, the grades of the entire class went higher at once. We even chose physics as a required elective. And on the weekend, our new teacher and us went to the cinema and museums to spend time with her. It was educational and quite fun. I think if you have ever had a young teacher, then you'll understand what I mean. A couple of months after school year started, the teacher's behavior seemed to me strange and intrusive, or something like that. And it was only her attitude towards me. My classmates didn't notice anything suspicious. She started to ask me lots of questions about my family and my hobbies and my health. The latter baffled me. Do I really look kind of weak or unhealthy? After some time, I noticed that me and Miss Greta met each other in the street quite often, and every time in completely different areas. When meeting me, she always said, "Dolly, what a surprise! What are you doing here? How do you feel? Does anything hurt you?" Even my grandma isn't so worried about my health. Something was wrong here. I became afraid of Miss Greta, so I tried to avoid her in every way possible. And if at school I could do it at least a little, then outside school I became her obsession. It seemed to me that she was everywhere. I became nervous, suspicious, and worried. And the thing was, I had no one to share my problem with. The teacher had an excellent reputation at school, and my parents would just laugh at me, saying that, for example, they saw our neighbor every day, but it didn't mean he was watching them. Over time, I realized my suspicions weren't nothing. The teacher's car often stopped in front of my house when I looked out of the window. When I left school, she walked 100 meters behind me every time. That her chasing me dream became so obvious, I had no doubt everything happening to me wasn't a coincidence. But what did she want from me? I had no idea. But I was scared for myself, for my life and health, which was especially concerning. Or was this young woman crazy? And did she plan to do something bad to me? I decided to gather evidence that the physics teacher was chasing me. A week later, I had hundreds of photos and videos confirming my fears. In the recordings where she asked me about my health, now I could prove the teacher literally followed me everywhere. To put it mildly, she was really intrusive towards me. Maybe at first I could at least come up with her with compromising evidence and directly ask about her intentions, but I was afraid she might stop chasing me and do something bad right away. And then I would have trouble for sure. So I decided to go to my parents and ask them for help. We were really close, and who, if not them, would protect me? I was afraid to hurt Mom, so first I showed all the materials to Dad. He said that the situation was serious and we would have to tell Mom, and then we would all go to the police together. When I saw Mom's reaction, I felt uneasy. She cried, telling Dad to protect me and start doing at least something. I understood her that maybe it's very scary when your kids are in real danger. Our whole family went to the police at once. Everyone was worried, and it turned out not to be in vain. On the way to the station, we saw the teacher's car following us. Mom started to get hysterical. Dad told her to calm down and not to shout, or we would get into an accident, and I started filming her on yet another chase on my phone. Two losers. We decided to ride around the city and not go straight to the police. But we were lucky, and after a while, she lagged behind us. But she called me and asked about my health and plans for everything. I tried to stay calm, saying everything was fine with me and I had a free evening. Then she offered to meet. I felt my voice begin to tremble, so I promised to call her back later and hung up. By that time, we had just arrived at the police station. We rushed in. After some time, the investigator interrogated us. I showed all the collected photos and videos and turned on the recording of the last conversation with my teacher. When the police identified her, they told us terrifying news. Even my impenetrable dad started to shiver. It turned out that she was registered in a psychiatric clinic, but then for some reason her personal record was lost, so they forgot about her. The investigator said that they needed to get her into a trap, so he offered to make an appointment with her at our place. He would send a special squad there. We had no choice. We went home with the police. Along the way, I called Miss Greta and told her everything the investigator advised me to. She agreed to come, and I promised her my parents wouldn't be home. They put me in some kind of protection, like body armor, but much thinner. When I asked what it was for, they told me I needed to be ready for anything, especially since we were dealing with a mentally ill person. Mom cried. She hugged me tightly and gave me her coin talisman, and then the doctors gave her some pills. She calmed down. They needed it because my mom could ruin the operation. At the appointed time, there was my teacher's car parked on the road, and I started to wait for her with a sinking heart. A few minutes later, she rang the doorbell. There was a pie in her hands. A moment later, one of the policemen knocked me down, covering me with his body, while the others threw the teacher on the floor. They handcuffed her at once. The apple pie fell onto the floor. Its crumbles flew right into my face. I think at this moment, everyone felt relieved, and then the interrogation began. Miss Greta said that I was her daughter and no one had the right to separate us. Frankly, I even thought I could have been adopted, but then I came to my senses and realized a mentally ill person was saying this. Our age difference is only 8 years. It's nonsense. Not otherwise. Miss Greta was sent for compulsory treatment. Some of my classmates got angry at me that I deprived them of a cool teacher, and her mother came to us. She excused her daughter and said that before Miss Greta was a normal, healthy girl and a student, but after entering the college, she was told that she was sterile, and she kind of lost it. Anyway, she couldn't stand it and started to rave about having a kid, but she set a goal to finish college and become a teacher at all costs. She graduated, got a job out of school, and then, well, you know the rest. After her mom's confession, I even felt sorry for her. By the way, since then, I hate apple pies. Have you ever had any fights with teachers? How do your teachers feel about you? Hi there, my name is Kala, and most of all in my life, I love milk. But it turned out that this is actually a real hell for me. Of course, only for my body. And to be honest, I still haven't managed to get used to such a condition. In my opinion, even before my birth, every day in our family started and ended with a glass of fresh milk brought by the farmer directly from the cow. My parents always said that it's very useful for a growing child's body and it's a source of calcium and protein. And since habits that were started with us from a very early age are most often ingrained in our lives, by our teens, I couldn't imagine my life without milk. Moreover, my parents and older sister also drank it every day, hand in plenty. But unlike the rest of the family, I never had health and strength because I was always suffering from a cough, runny nose, and dying of thesis. As long as I can remember, I was always dealing with this, and it never passed even for a little while. My parents were sure that this was just what I had to deal with, and there was nothing to be done. In general, I seemed to be quite healthy. That was so, up to a point. But when I turned 14 years old, right on my birthday, I went into the intensive care unit because my cough was so painful that I began to choke on my own phlegm. They hooked me up to a long ventilator and tried to find the cause of the suffering, but it was all in vain. Yes, some blood was taken, but the test never showed anything, so there was no diagnosis. It all looked very strange. After 4 days, I was transferred to an ordinary ward because I felt a little bit better, and my parents immediately arrived there with bottles of milk and a homemade cottage cheese. It was necessary to restore the strength of this exhausted girl. That same evening, I was again transferred to that intensive care unit with the same symptoms. All sorts of different specialists came to see me. They carried out a bunch of tests, but they found absolutely nothing wrong. This time, I stayed in the intensive care unit for a week, and my harassed parents were waiting for me in the ward again. My mother is wailing, wondering who I'd take after to be so weak and what she should do with me, and my father alone silently looking at me. They gave me some milk again and told me to drink it instead of water and left. That night, I felt so bad that I couldn't even take half a breath. The choking began, and in a panic, I only managed to press the medical alert button to call the nurse. After that, I lost consciousness and came to my senses in the intensive care unit. The period of my stay there increased again, this time up to 10 days. The doctors were shocked and whispered to each other about something, but I understood that if it continues at this pace, in a couple of weeks, I would just stay in the intensive care unit for a whole month. And there was a chance that even the doctors wouldn't be able to help me. It was necessary to look for the cause of my lung problems and understand where this mucus in my body was coming from, but even the doctors were confused. When I returned to the intensive care unit, I decided to provide myself a complete detox program and asked my parents not to come see me for a while. I wanted to stay alone with myself, read books, and figuring out what was causing my vulnerability. My mom was very upset by such a statement, but she said that it was my right, and in that case, she would send me a bottle of milk through the nurses and reminded me that I should drink it as often as possible. The first couple of days, I drank only water because I felt that my body needed to be cleansed. Then I started looking through our family photos, reading messages from my parents, and I was deeply touched. They loved me so much and were very worried about me. My mom asked me to drink the milk that she had sent specifically for me. Oh, Mom, how much I love her. I took the coveted bottle from the refrigerator and took only a couple sips, relishing such a familiar taste and remembering my parents. I guess I have to call them and thank them for the milk, I thought, and I went to the phone. I didn't start calling right away because I saw a notification on my phone about a new video coming out on my favorite channel. The video lasted for 10 minutes, and when it ended, I realized that my lungs were filled with mucus again. I started to panic. I pressed the medical alert button and drank almost a whole bottle of water at once to come to my senses. They wanted to send me back to the intensive care unit, but then they saw that my condition wasn't critical and left me in the regular ward, saying that I would have to wait for some famous professor. He was called to our clinic especially for me. This was good news. I could only hope that I wouldn't get worse. Otherwise, I would have to postpone the meeting with the professor. I took a couple of sips again and then got stuck on YouTube. Soon, my breathing worsened again. I tried to stay calm and distracted myself as best I could. In a few minutes, the itching started all over my body. I looked at my hands and they were covered with red spots. It seemed that because of my nerves and exasperation of the diathesis again, only the spots weren't the same as before, and my body had never been so itchy. I thought I somehow infected myself in the hospital, so I called the nurse. She brought me some kind of cream and smeared it all over me. Only it made me feel even worse. The intense itching simply became unbearable and the spots began to turn into blisters. I called my mother and said that I was very scared, and I asked her to come because I was afraid that I would go into the intensive care unit again. Mom said that she would come in 30 minutes and advised me to drink milk. I wanted to scream at her, "Mom, what milk? Are you really worried about now?" But then I pulled myself together and promised her I would take a few more sips. Well, it's not difficult for me. After my conversation with my mom, the famous professor entered the ward. At that moment, I was just drinking the milk. He began to ask me some questions and asked me to tell as much about myself as possible. 10 minutes after starting our conversation, I began to cough and choke, and the blisters were covering my whole body, which hurt like hell. I was immediately transferred to the intensive care unit. This time, I was put into an induced coma, and I woke up after 3 days in the ordinary ward. There was the professor with some papers in his hands. He asked me how I felt, and at that same moment, my parents came into the ward. My mother had a bottle of milk in her hands. She immediately began to open it, holding my cup in her other hand. The professor told my mother that she would have to forget about the milk forever, or at least make sure that it wouldn't ever enter my body in any way again, because it acts like a poison for me. My mom thought the professor was mistaken and told him, "Oh, come on, doctor. This is just milk. We buy it from the farmer. It's the healthiest drink for children." And then she gave me a glass. Then the professor said that if I drank what she gave me, in 10 minutes I would start choking again. My body would be covered with blisters even more. And this time it's possible that they couldn't save me because I'm allergic to cow's milk protein and lactose. And then he handed my mom a stack of papers that he had had in his hand the whole time. Mom still couldn't believe it, and the professor continued to shock her. He said that the cause of my suffering was in milk right from my birth. When I began to suffer from diathesis and incomprehensible mucus, all this time my parents were poisoning me with milk, pouring the strongest allergen into me, which accumulated in my body for years and almost killed me. All these words were confirmed by the test results. Everyone was shocked. For 14 years, I suffered and thought that I was somehow inferior and sick, but it turned out that I just needed to exclude gluten and milk from my diet, and I was given way too much milk to drink almost from birth, you know? Then I realized that, in fact, milk is not the drink in which I couldn't live without. It's just a tradition that was forced on me from my family. However, breaking off this habit was not so simple. I drank milk for 14 years, and it was not easy to just stop doing it right away. Nevertheless, I found a way out and simply replaced cow's milk with goat's milk. That's all. No more allergies, no more mucus, no cough, no blisters. I began to feel much better. I seemed to be filled with life and energy, and I even began to move around easier. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if not for the professor. Most likely, I would simply die after another cup of milk from choking, or septic fever because of popping blisters would lead to this sooner or later. Now I am incredibly happy that I managed to escape death and even got rid of this chronic disease. Now I have a completely different quality of life. I have an individual menu in my family. This doesn't trouble anyone because I can cook for myself. Hi everyone, my name is Ice Holden, and my story is about my cool cat who saved my life. Well, he really rescued me, and for me, he is a real magician and hero. I think you will soon understand my feelings. Duke, that is my cat, appeared in my life quite unexpectedly, which by the way, again proves that I have a very cool and extraordinary cat. He is a kind of tailed magician. He appeared in my life on Christmas night when I heard some strange rustling on our balcony, and we live on the second floor, just so you know. I was really scared and called my dad to check what caused those sounds. Dad also felt uneasy, and we did not expect to see anything pleasant there. Anyway, we had to check, and there was a cat. He was thin and hungry and demanding food as well as water. Everything worked out well, but guys, tell me how he got there. The cat was on the second floor of the building. It is really impossible to jump to such a height or to climb the wall. It just can't happen. Could he have fallen from above? Well, I don't know. There are no neighbors above us, and the attic of the building is closed. So the way he appeared, there is still a dark mystery. I think more and more often that he crashed onto our balcony straight from heaven. Well, what's wrong with that theory? Does anyone else have other opinions? Of course, we fed, washed, and warmed up the cat. And then we could have given him to an animal shelter or some of our acquaintances, because having a new family member was not part of our plans. But since Duke appeared in our life in a magical way, we decided that this was our destiny and he should stay with us. That's why we bought him a cat bed, a scratching post, as well as various food, and took him to the vet, so that was how he started living with us. Soon our cat began to show new magical powers. The thing is that in some absolutely incredible way, he began to identify sore spots if a person touched them, and after a few minutes, the pain would disappear. And this is definitely not a coincidence or self-suggestion. I know what I'm saying. Trust me. For example, once at night, my ear suddenly started aching. Well, yeah, I needed to wear a hat more often. That's true, but this problem appeared earlier. Because of this, I could not fall asleep. It hurt, but I did not want to bother my parents because in such a case, I would have to listen to their numerous explanations about what a hat is and why it's not worth going outside without it. Suddenly, the cat came up to me and carefully crawled up to the sore ear and stayed next to it for about 15 minutes until the pain completely disappeared. Apparently, the cat knew exactly where I felt pain and snuggled right up against that place. Although he had never come up to me at night, not even mentioning touching my ears. Is this mysticism? Cat mysticism? On another occasion, during the whole evening, he was constantly trying to climb onto my dad's chest. Actually, my dad is one of those supermen who never gets sick, and even after falling from the third floor, says that everything is fine with him. This was why we cannot understand what attracted Duke so much to Dad's chest. Actually, this is how he behaves when he wants to cure a person's pain. But was Dad really feeling pain there? We found out the answer to this question a few hours later, when my dad confessed that his heart was aching badly the whole day, and he was really surprised that then Duke was literally jumping onto his chest. But Dad also admitted that his heartache disappeared when the cat walked on his chest. On that day, we no longer had any doubts that Duke was a real cat doctor who identified sore spots on people and healed them. By the way, we still persuaded Dad to go to the hospital, and it was found out that he had had real hard problems. Since then, Duke has become our family doctor, a universal medicine in the home first aid kit, and just our favorite pet. We adored him, received treatment from him, and sometimes even allowed our relatives and friends to seek help from our cat. Thus, in his practice, he successfully cured a person from chronic migraines and healed pain resulting from a broken leg, as well as gastritis and many other diseases. But one day, something terrible and inexplicable started happening. Well, my parents, the cat and I seemed to be perfectly fine, but still there was something that bothered me a lot. The problem was that Duke began to snuggle against my back more and more often. He literally waited for any suitable moment and then stomped or laid on it. Something on the move, he jumped on it and dug his claws into my clothes. Well, if I didn't know that my cat was a doctor, I would have just definitely thought that he was crazy or just bold. But I knew that Duke would never snuggle against one in the same place of a person's body for no reason. His behavior made me very scared. In addition, I didn't feel any pain and had no complaints at all, especially concerning my back. I even went to the doctor who, I didn't tell him that the cat had found some kind of disease in my back. Instead, I lied to him a little and said that my spine hurt somewhere in the middle and asked him to carry out the necessary examinations. But visually, the doctor could not see anything that alerted him. That's why he recommended changing my backpack for a briefcase or a suitcase and stop lifting heavy objects. Well, as you already understood the problem, of course it can be called that it wasn't solved, and the cat was trying to lie on my back more and more persistently. I don't know how long it would have lasted if Duke hadn't gone totally crazy. He jumped on my back and began. This shocked everyone, as well as evoked panic and horror. At some point, my dad even threatened that he would take the cat to someone else. He was really angry because of Duke's antics. I was head over heels in love with him and could not even think about parting with him. I was asking, or rather begging, the cat to stop throwing himself on my back. I asked him to behave like normal cats, but no, he did not listen to me at all. In fact, I noticed that he felt uneasy as well because of the situation, and he would have been glad to stop paying attention to my back, but he just could not do it. He was angry and he suffered, but he did not back down. When I couldn't handle my fear any longer and Duke's behavior drove me to a nervous breakdown, I decided to take action. I went back to the clinic and said that I would not leave until my back, spine, and everything else in that area would be fully examined. For a very long time, the doctors had doubts about my normalcy and even asked me to visit a psychologist, but then they still prescribed examinations. I thought that this process would be really long, but the diagnosis was closer than ever before. And after making a CT scan of my spine, the doctor said that there was a tiny bump between my vertebrae, and this was nothing but a tumor that would actively grow if not removed as soon as possible. After 2 days, I had an operation. Yeah, I had cancer, but at the early stage, it was successfully treated. Thus, I was able to avoid the terrible outcome. I was really glad that everything worked out well and that I am absolutely healthy. Doctors were surprised that I was able to recognize the problem in my body. Usually patients only notice such tumors after it's too late, but in fact, I cannot claim credit for anything because it was totally the merit of Duke. It was he who was able to recognize my terrible disease at the very early stage, began to sound the alarm or rather hit me in the back. And I also think that maybe he was somehow slowed down the growth of the tumor with his energy, or whatever he uses during his crafty manipulations. I will not even talk about what would have happened if the cat had given up, gotten tired of bothering me, or if Dad had given him away. Duke is really my savior, my personal doctor, and I really adore him for that. Now I will never part with this tailed angel, and I am infinitely grateful to him. Hi there, my name is Catherine, and I want to tell you how my life has changed dramatically overnight. Until that moment, I could not have even imagined how much reality differs from everything that happened to me. I have always been a happy person. I had a strong and close family, a loving boyfriend, Dave, a cool dog, Toby, and many friends. I also had excellent grades in school and a talent for drawing. 2 months ago, I had my well-ordered and wonderful life full of fun, love, and other good moments. Dave used to take me to school in his old pickup truck. My mother had always prepared lunch for me, consisting of a couple of sandwiches and some sweets. My father helped me with my drawings regularly. In short, I was happy. Mom, Lily invited me to a sleepover. Can I go? I once asked Mom. Of course, Mom said. Kathy smiled. She said that she called me in the morning so that I know everything is okay. That day, for the first time, I felt something strange. I blinked. It seemed to me that just a second ago, my mom was wearing a green jacket. But then it turned blue. Mom immediately noticed a change in my face. Is something wrong, darling? She asked. Your face changed so dramatically. Were you wearing a blue jacket? It seemed to me that it was green, I said. My question surprised Mom, and she replied that the jacket was blue from the very beginning. I blamed it on the light change because the sun showed up suddenly from behind the clouds, illuminating the room. Probably when it was darker, the color just seemed different to me. "I'll call you, Mom." I just thought it was green because of the light. After these words, I kissed my mother on the cheek, took my bag, and left the house. Nothing strange happened that day, but the next day, I experienced something similar to visual hallucinations again. This time, it was a squirrel jumping on a tree. Pointing at it with my hand, I saw the surprise on the faces of my friends. "Kathy, there's nothing there," Sandra said. After these events, I decided to take some rest. I did not use the phone on the weekend because maybe the hallucinations were from looking at the bright screen the whole time. On Monday, I didn't notice anything strange, but I heard something strange instead. No matter where I was, I heard the same sound in my ear all the time, a strange squeak. It was like a charge bomb that I had seen in movies many times. Just in case, I even searched my bag to make sure that there were no explosives in it. Of course, there was nothing there. Saturday's date with Dave was the last in my happy and well-ordered life. He gave me a bouquet of daisies and invited me to a cafe to eat strawberry ice cream. I could still hear that strange sound, but I tried not to pay attention to it, attributing it to fatigue from school. Dave took my hand and squeezed it encouragingly. I smiled at him and nodded. Uncertainty, I tried to remain calm, but those sounds frightened me. I had never experienced anything like that before. We finished our ice cream and he gave me a ride home. I hugged him goodbye, walked to the house, and went to the bed almost immediately. Falling asleep, I thought of only one thing. I hoped that the squeak would disappear from my head in the morning. This was the last night of my former life. In a dream, I realized that the squeak became even louder. I opened my eyes and didn't understand where I was. I knew exactly there was no such bright lamps on my ceiling. My gaze met the white ceiling. The next second, I wanted to sit down, but realized that I couldn't do it. It seemed that my body refused to obey. I still heard the same squeak, but this time it was not in my head. It was somehow very close in this room. Somehow, I managed to turn my head and see a strange apparatus with numbers. I realized that I was in the hospital. Maybe I had gotten sick that night and my parents had called an ambulance. The nurse entered the room. She gasped and ran to me immediately, then pressed the red button located above the bed. I didn't understand why she was examining me so anxiously, and it would be better if I never knew the truth that befell on me that day. A doctor entered the room. He looked at me in surprise. He came up and felt my pulse. The doctor nodded with satisfaction, and some other made an entry on the chart.
"Catherine, you've been in a coma for a very long time. Don't worry that your body may not obey you. It'll pass after rehabilitation. I think you will be able to move and walk easily, but for this, you will have to try very hard."
The doctor's words made me gasp. Did he mean it? Was I really in a coma? How long have I been in a coma? I asked. This question, which interested me most at that moment. I couldn't believe that something this serious had happened to me.
5 years ago, Catherine, your mom had already lost her faith and thought you would not wake up, but I was sure that you were a strong girl and would be able to overcome the disease. Congratulations. This day can be considered your second birthday. I'm going to call your mom. She will come to you as soon as possible.
After that, he told the name of the medicine to the nurse and left. The nurse put me on an IV and also left the room, leaving me shocked. I was in a coma for 5 whole years. What happened during this time? I lay in bed and tried to get rid of the confusion of thoughts in my head. What happened to me? Why did I slip into a coma? Why did the doctor mention only my mother? Where's my father? How is Dave doing? The flow of thoughts was stopped by my mother, who entered the room. She covered her mouth with her hands and a few tears rolled down her face. Mom came to my bed and took my hand. "Catherine, dear, I thought I lost you. I didn't believe the doctor when he told me that you were awake." My mother squeezed my hand and smiled, brushing tears from her face with her free hand. I asked immediately what had happened and how I slipped into a coma. "Oh, baby, it happened 5 years ago. Your father, you and I went to the water park to celebrate your birthday. It was a very hot day. The sun was shining in my eyes. There were many accidents on the road. I asked your dad to drive more carefully, but he said that everything would be fine. But after half an hour, he lost control due to the bright sun. Our car fell off the bridge. I woke up in the hospital and was paralyzed for the next 6 months, and you lapsed in a coma. Kathy, since that day, I have never spoken to you because you simply could not answer me." "What about Dad?" I asked quietly, being afraid to hear the answer. Mom started crying again and covered her face with her hands, but after a couple of seconds, she pulled herself together and wiped her tears away. I already knew that I would not like her answer. Unfortunately, he did not survive. 5 years have passed. I have already accepted this fact of my life. Every day I thought that I only have you. For the last year, I could no longer hope that you would come back to me. My mother leaned over to me and hugged me gently. Dave, did he ask about me? I said. It was clear that Dave probably already had another girlfriend. Already because many years had passed. But my mother's answer shocked me. Dave didn't exist. She didn't know who he was. The next day, the doctor told me that most likely my subconscious mind invented everything that happened to me during that coma. This was not my past life. It was something that never existed. Perhaps I saw Dave at school in my brain and remembered him, or maybe this was a guy from an advertisement who remained in my memories and was used by my subconscious mind during the coma. A week later, my rehabilitation began. For a long time, I learned to sit down and then get up and walk. It was incredibly difficult for me because during the coma, my body became as if it was made of wood. I didn't believe I could walk again, and I was terribly sad that for the last 5 years, I lived in my dreams and fantasies. I started walking only 6 months later. I managed to do it though my walking was slow and without sudden movements. Returning home, I realized that this place was the same as in my memories from the coma. I'm so glad that at least my house is the same as that in the coma life. I said to my mother, running my hand over the familiar sofa. I had to study at home urgently to finish school and start living in reality. And a week ago, I received a letter. I managed to get into college, which made me really happy. The second good surprise was that I met Dave in college. More precisely, I met Peter, and he really was in a commercial for chips 5 years ago. Apparently, I remembered him very much since in my fantasies I fell in love with this guy. Finally, today, my life resembles the one that was there in the coma. I have friends and a boyfriend. I preserve cordial relations with my mother, and I am very glad that I was able to return to real life. But I will remember until the end of my days what happened to me in that coma.